It starts with the sound of footsteps, faint, almost distant, echoing through the empty kitchen late at night. You think it's your imagination until your brother wakes up screaming, haunted by the same figure you've seen before, the hunter. Dressed in shadow, eyes glowing red, he waits in the darkness, stalking your every move. But he's not alone. A little girl whispers for help from the hallway, her voice cold, desperate. You rush to open the door, and she's gone. This is no ordinary haunting. This is a nightmare that started with a glimpse of something beautiful, an angelic figure in the window, and then twisted into something far more sinister. Now every corner of the house seems to pulse with malevolent energy. Ghostly children hide in the attic, whispering about a bad man. And when you sleep, you're never alone. Shadows creep, doors open by themselves, and something, or someone, is always watching. The hunter never left. He's still there, waiting just like he's always been. But what does he want? And why is it always the children who see him first? Stay with us, if you dare. This story will pull you into the darkest corners of the supernatural, where nightmares don't fade when you wake up. They follow you. And tonight we go deeper than ever before.
Man, John, we got the killer introduction done. What a crazy time to be in the world of paranormal. For sure. So for anyone that doesn't know, this is John Griffin. Obviously, the intro kind of told his story a little bit as far as what he's doing, and I'm going to leave you a little teaser at the end, so you're not going to want to skip out on this one, folks. This one's kind of crazy. I'm super excited to have John on because he does something a little bit different than some of the people that I've had on before. We've had everyone from people that are starting out in paranormal, that's dealt in paranormal. We had Brooke that does the Wildwood Sanitarium, which was amazing. This one's cool. We're going to try not to go super science, but guess what? If it's super science, you just got to deal with it, folks. Listen, we do some high-tech stuff over here too, okay? Don't assume that everything is just plain and simple over here. Good night. You just don't wake up one day when you're like 20, you're dragging yourself out of bed and you go, you know what I think I want to do today? I want to do some ghost hunting. I don't think anyone's ever had that thought, right? I mean, maybe so. Someone's offended right now in the comments section going, that's exactly what happened to me, Bert. What are you talking about? But I'm assuming this all stemmed from somewhere. Did you believe in this kind of stuff when you was a kid, or did something spark like with me as a child? What happened?
Well, I woke up one day and wanted to do ghost hunting. No, I'm just kidding. No, I had my first paranormal experience when I was 4 years old. I went to a religious school. It was a Catholic nursery school, and naturally we had our Bible study, and they were trying to get me to go over. But I was that kid that was a bully back then. Mm-hmm. You couldn't get me to sit down there. I was going to play with the blocks, and playtime was the entire time. When I was 4, so I was always on the thinking chair. I have to add that. That was the punishment. You're on the thinking chair, and my mother would show up to pick me up, and John's on the thinking chair again.
I've been there a few times. So I understand.
Well, when I hit 4 years old, my younger brother Jeremy had not been born yet, so the back room was more of a playroom. I remember looking out the back window, and I saw what looked like an angelic being. It was this light figure, and it was beautiful. So I didn't know what it was. I didn't understand what I was seeing, and I brought it up to my teachers when I went back into nursery school, when it started back up, and they were like, oh, that was an angel. You should come over here and come to this Bible study here. So yeah, naturally that wrote me in. But that changed me. And I noticed, and even my parents noticed, for that year in nursery school, I was no longer on the thinking chair, maybe once or twice, but it wasn't a daily occurrence after that. But that was the first experience, which would later turn into a darker haunting.
Oh, wow. Now, what I found fascinating about what you just said there, and Brooke and I had this very similar conversation at a younger age for me and her, when we looked at something, or should I say when we saw something, we saw what seemed to be just like normal people. Like I'm sitting here talking to you. So for you, what you saw was slightly different. Then it almost gave a different kind of appearance. Is that my understanding on that?
Yeah, it was really nice. It was pleasant. It was a great experience, and it really opened up the door for me to start asking questions, not realizing that there was another side to all of this.
For sure. And I think that's the common denominator that a lot of people don't talk about. I think everyone says that everyone has to kind of fall into the same category. Well, you saw this and you saw this, so one of you are lying. I think that there's spectrums to everything. I don't necessarily know that what everyone sees is exactly the same. And I think that's why you got to kind of keep a little bit of a balance when we're talking about this stuff. A great example, and I wish we would have went into this a little bit more in Paul's interview, but he had saw a little boy walking down the road. And I think he said, man, I'm probably going to say this wrong. I believe they say that the little boy carries a gun on his shoulder, not Paul, but people talk about this and they say that he just disappears. And I always find that fascinating because I've personally never experienced that. And I'm like, how cool of a thing to see. Like, probably not. Like, it probably scared me half to death. I'm like, nope. You know what? This paranormal thing, not for Bert no more. Okay. Bert's out. You know what I'm saying? It's a little bit different when you see something, you're like, okay, that's normal. Like, that's things I see every single day. But you seeing this at 4 years old, I could almost see where for you now, looking at, like, if you see it again, you're like, okay, yeah, I've seen that before, versus someone like me that's not seen that. It'd be like, you know, some significant. And I said Brooke earlier. Brooke Pritzel, which if you've not seen the interview, you're going to want to check that out. After this interview, okay, you're here now. Don't leave. You better not leave. I see you over there. Don't you be leaving. Okay, stick along. But that's interesting. It's interesting that you had an experience where you saw something a little bit different. Now, between that and this darker experience that you had, was there anything paranormal or just kind of disappeared for a while?
Once my brother was born, that's when things started to take a turn. Which it wasn't too long afterwards, because I turned 4 on August 4th. It wasn't too long after that I saw the angelic being. Then nursery school started up. My brother was born November of that year.
Okay.
So things started to ramp up from there.
Interesting. Now, by ramp up, what do you mean? What do you mean by ramp up?
New experiences, and the experiences became more frequent.
Okay.
Where it seemed like, you know, the angelic being it appeared, and then it seemed like, well, you know, there was a period where it was like there's nothing really going on, and I mean, little did I know that there actually had been stuff going on. It's just that I hadn't noticed it yet. Years later, I would find out from my parents that when I was younger and I had just started walking, they thought that they heard me walking around in the kitchen. And so my mother asked my father to go take a look. My father came out, saw no one was in the kitchen, walked into my room, and found that I was dead asleep.
Wow.
So, and the kitchen and the hallway would play a huge role in the haunting, because that's where a lot of the activity would happen throughout the haunting that my brother and I went through. Interesting.
So for your parents, they had these conversations with you much after, I'm assuming. I don't think anyone would be like, hey, 7-year-old you, there's a ghost in the hallway. I don't think anyone ever does that. But now, probably talking later, like, did they believe that there was something there? I don't know when they moved in versus when you were that age. Had they always lived there, or was that something they kind of...
No, they had moved in not too long before I was born.
Okay. So they was there for a while. Had they had experiences before? Like, let's use, for example, when you were like a baby or anything like that?
I believe my mother may have had some experiences. My father, I'll say was, not a believer in any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. So for him, if he had experiences, they went by the wayside. My mother was the one who actually at the time believed in the experiences that I was having. But as I was growing up and talking about them, much like what you said, not sitting down with a 7-year-old and talking to them, I would bring it up, and my parents would basically say, no, it's a bad dream, or that's not being seen, stuff like that. My father didn't, like I said, didn't believe in it. My mother, behind the scenes, did believe. But she was trying to find a way to essentially not scare myself or my brother.
For sure, which makes sense. Something I find fascinating, a lot of people probably thinks to themselves, why is it that he dives into the time frames? And it's something that is so inconsistent with paranormal investigations and all the many stories I've told on the podcast. Like, let's use, for example, infield poltergeist. Now, whether you believe or you don't believe in the story, for all intents and purposes, doesn't really matter too much to me. Out of curiosity, I'm going to ask you, because maybe you know this. Do you know when, from the time they moved in until their first experience, do you know how long that was?
No.
This is mind-blowing. I didn't know this either until I did research on that case. It was 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So they lived there for 10 years, no experience. And then out of nowhere, they start having experiences. So that's why I always ask that question, because there's people that move in and they have these things that happen instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And then I start questioning, why is it that it would occur X amount of time later? I always find that fascinating. That's why I always ask, because I look for correlations, right? The scientific part of my brain always goes back to, can I replicate this in other set experiments? Or not to get too nerdy on y'all, but I look for repetitious things, right? I saw it here, I saw it there. There has to be something to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's just more for my science brain curiosity. Sorry.
No.
So you had this experience, and obviously you're talking about the walking and stuff like that in the hallway into the kitchen. Was there anything else, or was it just, because this almost to me sounds like a residual to a degree?
No, this was full intelligent.
Wow, that's crazy. That's interesting.
So what ended up happening is that I started having an entity. My brother would later name him the Hunter, and so this figure started appearing in my doorway, but I couldn't see what it looked like at first. So I had my bedroom door cracked open, and I remember hearing breathing, and I looked up, and I saw this blacker than black figure standing in my doorway, like peeking in, and it freaked me out, because I would go, Mom, Dad, but that's all you would get, just a. It's like, no, that's not it. And then you'd see the figure just kind of move away. So I find out it's not them. I eventually saw a person appear. It was a younger male, really, well put together, like well dressed, and he disappeared, and that confused me. I've never seen that. So me as a young kid, still at age 4, was like, I saw a person with a superpower.
Oh, yeah.
They can disappear. So I brought that naturally to school. I talked about it. I'm like, oh, I saw a disappearing person. I could see through them and stuff like that. I didn't know the term ghosts, spirits, anything like that. I didn't know what death was. But some of these kids brought this story home to their parents. And one of my friends came back, or well, I'll say ex-friend, came in and played with them. He said, I was told by my parents to stay away from you because basically, in a different set of words, because obviously this is coming from a child, basically I was satanic.
That's crazy.
And I'm like, okay. So I ended up, and that started to go around, and I noticed that people started to stay away from me. So that became, so I basically lost friends from that. And then I remember one night, because my brother, once he was born, he was put in the room all the way down the hall, and he had a sliding door. And I remember looking down the hall at one point, and I saw a shadow figure. I heard his door opening first off, like slowly opening, which I look down and I see this figure like a shadow walking into his room.
Yeah.
And then he started crying. It came to a point, like fast forward a few years, when he could start walking. He started to. I woke up one time and he was. My brother was sleeping in my bed, and something had freaked him out, and that became a normal thing. Like my parents tried to get him to go back in his room. When my parents would go to bed, I knew something was freaking him out, so I got up and after they went to bed, and I would go to his room and basically, bring him to my room. Being a protective brother.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's just part of that was remembering seeing that figure walk in there. That's just like, that's what's got to be bothering him. And he saw him eventually years later in a hunter outfit, standing by a Christmas tree, pointing a gun at him. And he said he had red eyes, but when he described his appearance, aside from the hunter outfit and the gun, he described something that the person that I saw that had disappeared. And I was like, oh my goodness. So he called him the Hunter. So that's the only time he appeared in a hunter outfit. And that's when we officially just referred to him from there on out as the Hunter.
That's interesting. It's interesting that you're able to correlate those two instances together because they're very different. But again, I believe that children are significantly more, well, what's the word I'm looking for? They can perceive things easier than we as adults. And it's funny because similar to your story about religion, it wasn't until I was in my 30s. So I'd had a series of events that occurred, but in my 30s, it was almost frowned upon at the church that I go to even deal with any kind of spirit. They almost see everything as like an occult to a degree. So it's like, you're not supposed to dabble in that. So I pulled away from it. And the moment I pulled away from it, it's almost like when you start beginning to ignore some things, it's harder to tap back into that. And it's interesting for you as almost vice versa. Like you're part of this, as a 4-year-old, you're part of this Catholic church environment. And they're like, no, there's almost like they're embracing you with open arms. No, let's talk about this over here. So it's interesting. It just goes to show, folks, regardless of where you come from, what religious capabilities, and we're going to be talking not so much about the religious aspects, but the thought process that no matter where you're from, everyone has a different view on it. And that is in itself fascinating, in my opinion. I've had conversations with a bunch of different religious aspects, and it's funny because the stories are all kind of the same. They all mesh together, but we have different names for things and different perceptions of what's real and what's not real. So it almost sounds like with the red eyes, though, and I've heard this in other stories before too. Do you believe, and again, there's no right or wrong answer here, do you believe that this was a entity? Do you believe that this could have been a demonic kind of thing? An elemental?
From a belief perspective, I'm not 100% sure on it. He kept on appearing as the Hunter, and he appeared as the Hunter for many years. And there was something that ended up happening going into my teens that makes me question whether that entity was another entity. But the thing is that there was someone that I delved into the history of the history of the house that helped me. They found the person. They found a record of the person, and when I saw them, they sent the picture to me. They sent the picture, and I'm like, "That's him. That's the Hunter." So, I mean, I personally right now believe that it was that person, but there are some things that happened during the haunting that make me question parts of it. And he only appeared with the red eyes once.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That only happened once, and that was with my brother. I didn't personally witness that event. So, but everything about him made sense. And the thing is, the person that they found that from the past, he was military.
Oh, interesting.
So we viewed him as the Hunter because it was like, oh, camouflage.
Yeah.
Maybe that was his military outfit. And there's even more to this, like more connections. Like my parents didn't really deal with the Hunter. I mean, not saying they may not have had any experiences with him, but we had 2 children ghosts that we interacted with, both my brother and I. I woke up in the middle of the night one time. We started, because the haunting got so bad in my bedroom, that I started sleeping in the living room on the couch for 7 years.
Interesting.
My brother started following suit. He would come into the living room too, and we didn't stay in our bedrooms at all. And our parents at that point had gotten us bunk beds, and now we're not using them. One night, the kitchen door, so the kitchen door, there's the living room, the kitchen, and then there's the hallway. The kitchen door was sliding door, it was shut, and I remember waking up and I heard a little girl saying, "Help me." Mm-hmm. So I hopped off the couch, and I go and I look through the crack of the door, and I see a little girl in the hallway saying, "Help me." So I flung the door open, and then she's gone. So I'm like, okay, that's weird. Then we have a little boy that was up in the attic, and he was always hiding in the back of the attic, and he was like my invisible friend. Mm-hmm. So I would go up and I would talk to him, and the little boy one time said, because I was like, why are you hiding here? You know, me as a kid. And he said, "I'm hiding from the bad man."
Oh, wow.
I'm like, wait a minute. So years later, when now I'm in my 20s, and I'm like, little girl saying, "Help me." Boy hiding from bad man. My brother seeing a hunter person with red eyes. Me being terrified by this other individual that's also terrifying my brother. It's always kids. Did this person in life have a problem with children? Because my parents weren't really experiencing anything terrifying. It was always kids. Yeah. And as we got older, the hunter faded away.
You know, something very interesting. We don't cover that so much on this podcast, but we do cover it on my other podcast, which is Deceptive Reality. We talk a lot about energies that children give off and how the thought process is that certain entities can feed off of that energy. Mm-hmm. So prime example, there's been government, and we're probably talking a little left to center for this podcast, but there was a government project called the Project Montauk. Have you ever heard of that?
Not offhand, no.
Have you ever seen the television show Stranger Things?
Another one I haven't seen.
Okay, that's okay. So there's a Netflix series called Stranger Things. It's about these kids. It's got like an 80s vibe to it, where they're opening this portal to what they call the upside down, or like it's like this place where these demonic things live, and super. It's a fun Netflix show. But that show came from Project Montauk, which was a real government created project. And what they were doing was kidnapping kids, and they were wiring them to this unit. And what they were trying to do was opening a portal to another dimension. And they was using the children's energy to do that. But there would be like 30 kids that they were doing this to. And all this came out years later.
Wow.
But I sit there and I think to myself, there's a government project that used kids and used their energy. And we talk about how a lot of these entities will oftentimes try to frighten kids. And then it takes me back. Listen, I'm sorry. This is just what it takes me to, folks. The animation monsters, like they get their energy from scaring kids. And I'm like, what if there's like some truth to that? Like, what if this is all based off the concept of, because fear, that's an energy source that I believe could potentially feed into something if they're looking for a certain kind of energy. I don't know. I find it fascinating. And then as we get older, obviously we're less scared of things. I don't know. That's where my weird mind goes to anyway. Sorry. But there's always a correlation. There's always a correlation between young kids and scary entities. Almost every single story that I've done, or from a podcast perspective, there's always kids involved. Always.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why, like, for a while when we were doing residential cases, if I heard a kid was involved, immediately it was like, yep, this is an emergency case where we're gonna go into this, because I know from childhood what this was like.
Yeah.
but from childhood, it was. All I can say is that you kind of had that alone in the world feeling, because it's like your parents told you that it's a bad dream. Your friends abandoned you, which it followed Jeremy and I. It followed us throughout our school career, all the way through high school.
Oh wow.
My brother became guilty by association, because it's like, oh, it's that freak's brother.
Yeah.
So they start picking on him, and he started not having friends. And it's all, and I look back at this and I'm like, it's because I opened my mouth. My brother suffered because of this. So he went into depression at a very early age. So did I. But I think, if anything, he beat me to it, or beat me in the sense of how early his depression was. And I mean, we didn't want anybody to ever go through what we went through again, because it was viewed as being either evil or like completely evil. We were being viewed as satanic or demonic. We were outcasts, and we saw what it did to us on an emotional and psychological level, what it did to both of us. And for me, definitely for me, for sure. I know my brother was believed in it too, but like for me, I vowed that when I do this paranormal research, I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna bring attention to it and what it does to society, because the amount of impact that it's actually had. I know people who ended up taking their own lives because of the paranormal. I know. Yeah. And just seeing that the paranormal did that. And it wasn't, I'm not saying that, there aren't spiritual activity that leads to that, but seeing how other people have treated these people who have gone through it. Because there is that lack of understanding of what's going on. Like, is it real? Is it not? Is it evil? Is it not? There's that treatment that comes with it. And like what you said, when, like you're, there was a time period where it's like, it was a no, you don't talk about it.
Right.
There's still those cases now, and I find that now, at 38 years old for me, it has affected my life so much that I've gotten to the point of that abandonment, where a person will come into my life and I'll go, okay, how long are you going to be in my life for?
Sure.
When are you going to leave? And I never want them, or of course I don't want them to leave. This is friendships, relationships, everything. Mm-hmm. And, for my mind, it's already set that they're going to leave, because everybody always leaves anyway.
Sure.
And that's when, when they do leave, I look at it and go, yep, I was right. And I know part of it is me pushing them away too, because,
sure.
But this all stemmed starting with the haunting. And, when I was able to trace it back and see, and that's why I'm also trying to work on myself too, because I know part of this is a response to everything that's happened and how it's built over these years.
Well, and you got to think part of it also is going to be a defense mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Like, a lot of what you're doing is to protect yourself. If you've already had this stuff, and you're absolutely right. When you look at things like when I was a kid, I mean, if you said, man, there's a spooky thing around my house, some people would be like, okay, well, whatever. And then you'd have those people go, he's the freak. Stay away from the freak. So it's almost like you became an echo chamber of your own self, where you're able to talk about this with a very small group of people, versus now, I think there's just enough, whether it's a good thing or it's a bad thing. I'm sure we'll dive into some of this too, but I feel like sometimes it's a good thing from the standpoint that some of these shows and YouTube and stuff like that came out where it's kind of acceptable. It's okay to talk about this. Versus back then, you might read it in a book, or you might have a show like Unsolved Mysteries that presented it. And that's why when I created this podcast, it was all about a safe space. Anyone can tell their story, no matter how outlandish some people might think it sounds like. The way I look at everything in life is, just because I've not experienced something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Just means that it hasn't existed for me. And that's kind of the cool thing with today's society, is with all of this extra place that people can now see, hear, read about it, watch. It's become more of the norm. It's become more of an accepted kind of thing. Now, with this entity that you guys was dealing with all the way through high school, obviously it took a big toll on your brother Jeremy. For you, obviously it took a little bit of a toll, but maybe not to such a degree. Do you think that that is what kind of made you take the direction of what you're doing in life now?
It definitely has, but also I started running my own paranormal team when I was 16. My first paranormal teams. I've been running paranormal teams since for 22 years now, and that's what has really the methods and all that, the way we do things has evolved, and I started looking at it as more of I asked one question so long ago, well over a decade ago, because I was doing residential cases, and I'm like, how can I help somebody if this is unexplained?
Yeah.
So I'm like, wait a minute, this is all backwards. I need to be researching this. I need to have an explanation to go with this, because to me, it's like, if I go into, because I used to work at a hospital, not doing medical, but when I think about the medical research into something, would you go in and try to cure a new illness or disease with no research at all? Like, right. Here, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to tell you exactly what's wrong with you, and this is the first time we're ever seeing it.
You got to research it.
Yeah, you have to. You can't develop medications or cures or anything of that sort without understanding what it is you're dealing with. So, if there's no explanation, I'm viewing the paranormal as like almost like a new medical condition. How can I explain this? Or if I can't explain this, how am I going to walk in and go, here's what you have. Here's how you get rid of it. Because look at all the different, when you think about it, if you look at all the different things that are out there, all the different the hypotheses and beliefs, like you have all these different religious beliefs into ghosts, demons, and all that. Then you have ghosts that apparently can, or they're supposedly ghosts. There's some that are all ghosts or demons, and then there's demons that are known as shapeshifters, so they could also shapeshift into all the things that you see, but maybe the shapeshifters don't actually exist, maybe the demons don't exist, maybe the angels don't, but then the angels could exist. It's like, then they could be interdimensional beings, but maybe it's not. If you really sit there and you break down all these different beliefs, all these different that's all we have is you could probably write multiple novels just listing all the different beliefs and hypotheses that are out there, but we have no facts.
Correct.
So, and then all these hypotheses have a tendency to contradict all the other ones.
Right.
So what is it that we're actually dealing with there? And that's what really made me go to the point of we need to take this and we need to bring it down here. What is it exactly that we're dealing with? And so that's what we're working on, is cracking that code.
That's smart. That's a good way to look at it. I've never really thought about it that way, but you're dead on. Like, if you're going into cases, you kind of have to understand. It's kind of like right now, like I'm doing all these podcasts to basically build the story and the narrative before going to some of these locations, because I want to understand, okay, what happened? What caused this to happen? What is the theory on why this happened? And for me, at my current stage, which might be, a significantly different theory than yours, But this is why I love having these conversations, because we kind of pick each other's brains on stuff like this. But for me, at my current stage, I believe that almost everything's on an extra dimensional plane. And by that, I'm going to try to simplify this. I'm sure some of you guys are like, man, you just tell ghost stories. This is my theory on this. Obviously we live in a 3-dimensional plane, but science concludes the fact that obviously we're also on a time scale. So technically we're on a 4-dimensional plane. But I'm starting to believe, and science has even technically proven, that they know for sure we have 8 total dimensions. They can scientifically prove that, and they did it much more elegantly than how I could potentially butcher it here. They basically created this glass prism that somehow shows this shadow of a dimension that we can't physically see, which to me in my brain sounds like the craziest thing I think I've ever said. But there's someone way more intelligent than me that has a video on YouTube. I might link it in the description down below, but they found a shadow of a dimension we can't see, which blows my mind.
That's amazing.
It's first off, how did you make this prism thing? I don't even know. Like, it's like Neil deGrasse Tyson. If he ever came on here, he'd be like, this guy is an idiot. But the way he understands that field, it's like that person creating whatever that was. First off, was it a mistake that you did? In which some of science's greatest discoveries has been mistakes by far. Yeah. So I sit there and I think, did they create this thing? And they go, what the heck is this shadow? Where's this coming from? Oh, wait, this is from a dimension we can't see. I can't answer how they came to that conclusion, but you sit there and you think, okay, if there's multiple dimensions that we cannot see, but we can see the shadow, it's like the double slit experiment.
Mm-hmm.
You look at that and you go, why is that? And it would be very similar to what I'm talking about. Why is there a shadow of something we can't see? My theory is now, and this is just my personal belief, I believe once we pass away, maybe we move into the next dimensional plane. So it's one above ours to where we can't see, but they can see, almost like looking down into something.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I came to that theory is whenever they talk about spirits or ghosts or, whatever you want to call, choose your favorite entity, whatever you want it to be. Sometimes you see cases where it talks about how the person floats, or sometimes the person looks like they're inside of the floorboards. But the more I thought about it, well, what if that on their dimensional plane, that's not the case? So for them, they're walking, but for us, because that dimensional plane doesn't quite line up, they appear to be floating.
So I can throw something out there, a research thing that we've been doing, and this kind of stems from my brother Jeremy's sort of from his research. He came up with a thing called pseudo consciousness, or cloud consciousness. He gave it 2 different names, but he mostly went with pseudo consciousness. From there, because I'm not going to butcher what he said, he had a way of saying it. When he passed, there was a point where I knew my brother was in the car with me. His spirit was traveling with me, but then at the same time, apparently he was interacting with my mother at the graveyard. And I'm like, so my mind, of course, at the time was going, well, are we sure that one of us has Jeremy and the other one's not a deceptive spirit? That led into, I tested a thing called split consciousness. And split consciousness can also essentially be looked at as the other dimensions, how you were saying, like looking down. So what we did for an experiment was I put a digital recorder in my brother's room, or what was his room. And then I took a digital recorder and I started the recorders at the same time, put one in the room, and then asked my brother to stay in the room if his spirit is there. Stay there. I want you to try to answer in both recorders at the same time. I don't care how you do it, if you do it one recorder or the other, or but I'm going to go to the car. I'm going to sit in the car with the other digital recorder, and I'm going to ask questions. Those questions you're not going to hear in that other room, because I have no walkie-talkie, no nothing. It's going to be that digital recorder with nothing but silence. when I went back to the digital recorders, there were points where I got answers in the car. There were points where I got answers in his room.
Oh, wow.
And they were direct answers to my question that I'm asking in the car. And then there was one case where I got an answer on both recorders at the exact same time. I was able to actually take both the audio, put it together, and the answers came through at the same time. I did that again at Wildwood Sanitarium with the same results. They were answering questions that I was asking in 2 separate recorders on 2 separate floors. So there was one case where I got an EVP. We were in the car, and I got an EVP that a male, and I believe it was my brother, saying 7,000 feet. I don't know what that means. Are you 7,000 feet above me? Like, what is this 7,000 feet thing? I never got an answer for that, but we started testing more on the split consciousness, and then that led into the whole dimensional portion of it, of, you know, if he's in the 4th or 5th dimension or something like that, he's going to see and hear and communicate in a very different way. He's going to potentially be able to see me, be in the car with me, while at the same time being at the cemetery with my mother 5 hours away. That's where it would become more possible. But the other thing that goes with that that I found interesting is that when there was the split consciousness portion of it, where they answered in 2 separate recorders, the quality of the EVP went down. Like, you could hear the answers, but the quality went down. But if he answered in one location, the quality was higher. So it made me wonder, are they splitting? Or the further out they get, like, they have to kind of like really look down, or however they would look down. I'm more of using your term on that one. Where they're kind of like, okay, I'm going to move further back, and I'm going to speak, and my sound wave is going to project to these 2 recorders. And that's why it doesn't work so much, because they're further out, and maybe that's the 7,000 feet thing. But then when he comes down to focus on the one recorder, it works out better. I mean, these are just questions I'm throwing out there. I don't have answers for them, but these are things that I'm thinking about, and thinking about ways of measuring and doing further experiments to try to test this active hypothesis.
You know, something that reminds me of 2 things actually that you said there reminds me. I did an interview with Joe. This was a while back, which he said he was possessed by demons for 50 years. He was just exorcised the beginning of this year, and he did an interview with me, and he said something that's kind of stuck with me since we did that interview. And he said, now his was obviously demonic. Mm-hmm. I would assume if they're interdimensional, or some people will say extra dimensional, because they can go into extra dimensions, that potentially if it's a demon, or if it's a regular passed on person that is now quote unquote a ghost, or a spirit, a elemental, or a shade, or whatever you come from, that they don't necessarily work on a timeline. So he said that though for us, we may look at a haunting or a case of almost like the oppressiveness of even having like demonic activity, or a case of possession. He said, though we may see it over the course of 5 years, for them, it's not that case, because there's not that time dimension that we're dealing with. It's on a very different plane. Mm-hmm. And you kind of mentioned something along the lines of, you know, looking at things from a time perspective. He said something very similar, which I find amazing. The second thing that you said that really made me think is, if you think about it, if you're talking on a walkie-talkie and you're on the correct channel, it's very clear, it's very precise. But let's use, for example, if you're a channel off, sometimes you'll get bleed off. Way harder to hear. I wonder if for them, it's kind of like that as a case, to where there's maybe you're getting the bleed over, like maybe because we're talking about energy, right? It's like whenever people talk about that realm and trying to communicate, you know, the first thing they talk about is, well, my device has lost this power, or people start feeling more fatigued. And they believe that whatever that entity is maybe possibly using some of that energy from devices or people around them to create an energy source for them to be able to come through. I'm curious if by doing that, it almost extends them to a degree to where maybe they're now using or exerting more energy, which may cause it to not produce the same level of quality.
There's I could see that being a possibility. And the other part that we did do a test, because I did notice something, and this was when my brother was alive. We were doing tests on EVPs, and the one thing I noticed with the audio is that there was a point where I started listening more to the audio quality, the contents of it, as opposed to the words that were being said. So I was going into full research mind mode at that point. And there was this EVP that we caught that had an echo. Sounded like as if we were in there talking. And when I looked at the room that this happened in, it was a large room that had great acoustics. So I started listening to other EVPs and started comparing the environments where those EVPs were occurring, as opposed to, in comparison to all the other environments. And, did they have echoes? Did they not? Were we getting more Class A's, Class B's, or Class C's in these specific environments? And that led into, sound wave study with that. So I started doing an experiment to try to do comparisons of, are we going to get more Class A's and more EVPs in environments that have great acoustics, and look at also the humidity level and such, because I know that can all affect sound, versus areas that don't have that and have less humidity, or, et cetera. And then, can we change the environment enough that it could actually affect the quality or the amount of EVPs captured? And so we took some of the rooms that were open, that had great acoustics, and we cluttered them. And then we opened up some of the other rooms. And it did have an impact on EVPs. Oh, wow. We ended up getting a decrease in quality in the rooms that were cluttered, that used to get great EVPs, versus the other rooms. So we're like... So now it made us really delve into sound waves, wanting to learn more. And then at the same time... how is this being that has no physical body producing a sound wave? And so that was leading to other studies, like we were looking at, like, is there a way that we can measure the point of where the sound wave is starting, like where they're speaking? How far do they how far does their sound travel? Because we wanted to also start to work on how can we narrow it down to where are they in the room, if like, let's say they can actually be there, like they're actually standing in a room in a specific spot. Is there a way that we can measure where they are so we can position ourselves accordingly, or even reverse engineer that, I guess? I don't know if that's the proper term. Reverse it, where I want to know from this recording, based off of this, where are they? Where were they standing in the room at the time? So, again, all that stuff is just kind of like, it goes from one thing to the other, and it just keeps on building.
Something that Nick and I are looking to do when we go, because we're going to start doing, you guys are going to start seeing trailers in about 6 months. But we actually have 2 locations set up, one of which you spoke of, which is Wildwood Sanitarium. That's with Brooke. We're going to be there on September 6th. And then we're going to be at the Hinsdale house on September 5th. So the day before. So one of the things that we're going to do, the mixer behind me that we typically, I use it for the podcast. It has 8 separate channels in, and they all record simultaneously depending on how many you choose. And what I wanted to do was run XLR cables to the Wildwood's going to be difficult because of the spaciousness and kind of how you'd have to set it up. But what I want to do is run 8 different seven different microphones around the house. And then we'll have one dedicated to our lavaliers. that we're going to be running because we have the wireless lavaliers that we're going to be using. But what I want to do is it time syncs it perfectly across all the channels. And what I want to see is, okay, we capture something in this room. Are we in the same regard capturing something in this room over here at the same time frame? Or let's use, for example, sometimes you'll be like, feel like I heard walking behind me. Well, now can we look at the same timestamp in other rooms and go, well, okay, this is also over here at the same time frame, or maybe you can hear like a continuation from one room to the next. That's one big thing that I talked about doing because I think there is a correlation. I think that it's not uncommon to believe that if they're on a different dimensional plane and they're doing whatever it may be, one of the things that I found fascinating, not to jump too far ahead, but one of the things that I found fascinating that you guys did is you're also trying to incorporate some seismic sound to it, to your investigations, which you see it, but you guys do it differently than how I've seen it before in the past. And that's fascinating to me because, when you take into account seismic, when we're talking about dimensional planes and what could be happening, and it might not be dimensional planes at all. That's just my opinion, my theory. But when you're dealing with dimensional planes, there's so many different things that I don't think that a lot of people think about. And I think that as far as research goes, I think that we need to look at things like infrasound. We need to look at things like infrared lighting, a lighting spectrum that our own eyes cannot see. Things such as even static electricity. If there's an opening of a dimensional plane, I'm not of the opinion that there wouldn't be an increase in even static electricity in something like that. So I don't know that. I think a lot of investigators will pull out a cool gadget and they're like, hey, look at this. They use it for 30 minutes and they move on. And rightfully so. You have so much to do and so many different things to see, and you got a very short time frame. I think people, they see these videos that are an hour long and they're like, well, they must have been there for like 5 days. Most of the time, thank you, Brooke, if you're watching this. She says she'll let me into the Wildwood a little bit earlier. They're a little bit loosey-goosey on that, which is good because when you're trying to create content, you're trying to create B-roll. You need B-roll. Well, shoot, that might be 2 hours of just shooting B-roll. And then you got 2 hours of setting all the equipment up, the mics and the cameras and putting the lavalier on and doing a sound check and, all of those things. Then you've got maybe an hour where you're just looking around and going, okay, where's other things happen inside the house? Is it conducive that maybe I do something here? Luckily, by watching some of your stuff, I'm kind of like, okay, well, when I go to the Wildwood, maybe I might want to focus on this area or that area. So I'm very thankful to teams like yourself that makes that a little bit easier for people like me. Even the Hinsdale house, which is going to be the day before, I've seen so much footage on it now that I go, people say this is haunted, but there's less activity than here in the house. So if I've only got 12 hours in the house, that's where I want to concentrate a big load of my time on. But I do think that a lot of people needs to incorporate a lot of these different techniques, because if we're going to crack the code, we kind of got to look at everything to a degree. We can't just fixate on one thing and go, well, to make a great YouTube video, I need X, Y, and Z. And listen, I'm not saying anything about anyone that creates content. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if we're in it to try to crack what it is, for people like me, for people like you, we kind of have to look at a lot of different things that science has proven.
Yes.
So, I don't know. I find that very fascinating. When you talk about that stuff, it's kind of like, yeah, that could be big. That could be really big.
Well, we also did... we did use mics. We had a person that was a musician. He had we went to his house, extremely haunted, and he had these mics, that nice standing mics.
Yeah.
And he had them hooked up to a computer, so we were getting live stream on them. And I don't know if this was the first time we actually got a split consciousness thing, because I heard the answer come over on the headphones live. And this is years ago. We're talking probably about a good, I think about 12 years ago. And I heard the answer come over live, and I was like, okay, we got to pause this for a second. I want to find out where this came from, because I thought it was in the room, because I was asking a question in the base, so to speak, and we had a microphone in the base. I go back to the base, I silence all of them, and the answer wasn't there.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, what? So I started going through each of the microphones, and sure enough, it was in the room that was on the a floor above us, and it was a direct response. And I'm like, what? What?
How's that possible?
Was this the first time we experienced split consciousness? Maybe they heard me through the floor. I don't know. But that happened. It didn't happen again when we tried it, but it happened. So I'd be interested to see how they, like, when you go around on like Wildwood and Hinsdale and do that, like the responses that you're going to get. Because Wildwood, if anything, it's... I almost not gonna say burst out laughing when you were saying about you're doing Hinsdale before. That's exact in 2018 when Jeremy and I went to the Hinsdale House of Wildwood Sanitarium for the first time. That's exactly how we did it. Hinsdale first, Wildwood next, and there was a strategy behind it because we had a hypothesis that we were building at the time, and we chose those two locations very specifically for it. The hypothesis is that Hinsdale House was going to have more apparition-related activity than sound or EVPs, and Wildwood was going to be the complete opposite. And when we went there, our results were right.
Yeah, that's kind of the same thought process that I had. I wanted to do Hinsdale first because after seeing the information that I've seen and talking to people that I've talked to, this again is just my theory. I believe that Hinsdale/Dandy House, I believe that whatever that is, though there could be human entities that have passed on, I believe there's something else there also. And I believe some people will say elemental because it's the land. It's not necessarily the house, because you'll have experiences outside of the house also. You know, probably one of the scariest stories that I think Paul told was after some events, and he and I believe one of the pastors had pulled in to the driveway, and they was walking up to the house, and he had saw Clara up in the window, and he was waving to Clara, and Clara waved back. And as he's waving, he sees someone coming from the side of the house, and he looks over, and it's Clara. And he asks Clara, he goes, "If you're here, then who am I waving to up there?" And she goes, "I know, they're all over the house. They're all over the house. When you go inside, you're going to see them all over the place." And to me, it's like, that is crazy. Now, I also have a theory, and I would love to say that I came up with this. I don't think I came up with it. I just think that I'm probably one of many people that's came up with this. I believe that if something is pulling energy from something else, sometimes I'm curious if they can take on the appearance of whomever that is that they're pulling energy from. And the reason I say that is I've seen enough stories now where people talk about watching their son walk by or watching their spouse walk by to find their spouse or kid in a different room that has no acknowledgement of what's going on. But whenever you look at those cases, those people typically that have been quote unquote mimicked is oftentimes the ones that have had the most experience with the paranormal, or they're the ones that's worn down more, or they've got less energy than the rest of the household, which leads me to wonder if they're pulling energy, is it possible that they are also then in return able to maybe mimic whatever that is? That's
interesting.
That's in a lot of stories. One of the craziest things I heard, and I wish I could remember what story it was. It was a recent one. I've not even brought it to my podcast yet, but it's a woman, her and her husband was living in the same, they'd kind of just gotten together. They were in the process of moving all their stuff into the house. But they were still kind of living separate, but they were still living there also kind of the same time frame. They just gotten married. And she was at home. I think she was in the bedroom or the bathroom of the bedroom, one of the two. And she heard the door open. She heard her new husband walk in. He walked by. She said she said something to him. He didn't acknowledge her. He just kept walking. She thought he was mad about something because they had been arguing about something that had to do with the house. Mm-hmm. She walks out. She tries to figure out, what the problem was. Couldn't find him in the house anywhere. Hour later or so, he walks in the front door and she goes, "Are you mad? Like, is there something going on?" He goes, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "You walked by like an hour ago. And then I'm sure you went outside. You probably did. Like, if it's something, just tell me." And he goes, "I just left work. I literally just left work. I just now got here." And she thought it was so weird, but come to find out, he wasn't talking about, he had some activities inside that house when he was doing some of the painting and some of the renovations that she had not experienced yet. But whatever this was mimicked exactly what he looked like. Now, could part of it be a fleeting, but here's the thing. When you learn somebody, you learn how they sound, how they walk, and you don't even have to see him. You can hear him. So she clearly knew, if anything, this is what he would sound like. This out the corner of her eye, this is what he looked like. This is clearly him. But it makes me wonder if that has something to do with that energy that maybe they're pulling.
You got me in deep thought now.
Sorry.
Here we go. We're gonna spend the rest of the episode of just
deep thought. Yeah. It's interesting things like that though that makes me think. It's like I told Brooke when we was having our interview, and she's like, "That's a really good way to look at that." I've always looked, because similar to the conversation we've been having up to this point, my theory is, if you're on a different plane and there's not time attached to it, if there's an energy thing and there's a connection from an energy standpoint, and I've heard this from psychics also, it's almost as though, for whatever this entity is, if they have that connection, I don't know that you have to be in the same location. I believe that they're always on that plane where there's some form of connection. And much like the internet, if you're sitting at a computer, you can visit any site that you want to instantaneously.
Yeah.
And I believe that entities, or whatever these extra dimensional beings are, I believe they're capable of the same exact thing.
We did have a study called what's called ghost method of travel. And because it was just a random question I kind of thought of, and I know other people have asked it, but it's like, when you see a ghost and it's not a physical object, well, why don't they, fall through the floor? If they're sitting in the car with me and I drive away, do they go through the car and out the back? And it's just kind of like, oh yeah, see you later. It's like, how do they travel? Can they teleport, so to speak? Can they actually sit in the car with you while you're driving? Like, these are all things that I've really wanted to know. So like the whole being in multiple places, or just being able to just go there, stuff like that, like the internet and such. To me, it's not far-fetched, because we're so used to our limitations, because right. Here we are, a physical body. I can't just, I'm there. They are minus this. And understanding their composition, understanding what they're truly made out of, and the different elements that they use to either speak, show themselves, travel. When we have a better understanding of that, we'll understand more about their travel methods, how they interact with the physical environment, how they could speak without a physical mouth, vocal cords, tongue, all that, and how they make their appearances. Like, there's so much that we can learn by just that one question of, what is a spirit's composition? When we have that, when we begin to crack that code, in my opinion, everything else is going to start falling into place. Because once you understand their composition, you can understand how they begin to interact with all the other elements within different environments, other different objects, how they can interact with us, how they can affect us. Because let's be real, and I know I'm going to go off on a tangent.
That's fine.
I looked at a list. I created this list. I can't say I looked at a list. The list I was looking at was the one I was making. I made this list. I'm like, all these experiences that I had, these different the different things that ghosts did: opening and closing doors, moving objects. They could supposedly walk through objects. They can supposedly insert themselves into dreams. They could supposedly plant thoughts in our minds. So supposedly they could do all these different things. How does that affect society? How can they affect society on a global scale? And thinking about it, if that there's true intelligence behind all of these consciousness, if this is truly, and let's say there's supreme beings out there. Let's say we're talking angels and demons, and from what we look at, a supreme being like God and such. Does everybody? Because when I think about it, with a ghost, I don't think a ghost's life is necessarily like, I'm sleeping and a ghost decides, what, today I'm gonna go see John Griffin while he sleeps. Oh, that's interesting. So he sleeps that way, and then tomorrow night I'm gonna go and, oh yeah, this is how this person sleeps. That's interesting. I'm sure that and from what I've gotten from EVPs, ghosts are talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Are they planning things together? Do they play a big role? Like there's a superior being and they're going, you know what? We need you to do this because we need to set this into motion. Like people meeting. Are they setting things into motion? World events. How far does this really go? And even with dreams, I know I'm going kind of, these are how literally it happens, where I'm like, I'm thinking of a hypothesis and all of a sudden it just starts branching into all these other things.
Yep.
With the dreams, I started asking the question because my brother appeared in my dream a couple times. But my question to that is, do they create the environment in which they are going to insert themselves in the dream? Or is the environment already created by myself and they insert themselves in? Do they even insert themselves in at all? I want to understand, and that's where it goes from like the method of travel to another research element called limitations of ghosts. I started doing tests on what are their limitations, what are objects that they can interact with. So like I started doing a thing about like plastic, glass, and styrofoam, and I want you to try to tap this, I want you to try to make noises with this, etc. Which would we get more interaction with? Are you capable of walking through walls or doors? And if so, like to me, if a door opens by itself and there's no one in the house, no recordings, no nothing, why did the ghost have to open up the door? If you could walk through it, why did you open up the door? So are there certain elements that they cannot go through? And then ultimately, when you find that stuff out, what does that tell us about their composition? What are they made out of? So it's been heading into between ghost method of travel, limitations of ghosts, the different the EVP sounds, split consciousness, pseudo consciousness. It just kept on building and building and building. They're all interconnected,
right?
But it's all leading back to that one question of what are they made out of? And I know the typical argument is that it's energy, but energy has multiple categories. So I'm trying to understand which category of energy they fall under, the subcategories that go along with it, and then, I mean, are there things that we haven't discovered yet, that science hasn't discovered yet in regards to energy itself, that we're missing? And maybe the ghosts are the missing link, and once we understand that portion of it, it's going to open up. Oh my goodness, what else could this open?
Well, see, there's a lot of things, like I spend my time watching a lot of stupid off-the-wall scientific discovery, or sometimes I just watch things and I get fascinated. Probably one of the things that you talked about, let's go back to like the dream state, right? When we talk about dreams, and are they creating that instance per se, or are we creating it and then they're coming into it? I watched this. It was a science. It had nothing to do with the ghost realm at all. Mm-hmm. It actually went into sleep paralysis, which I found interesting because, sleep paralysis is in a lot of paranormal activity within, certain things. One thing that I found fascinating is every single person, once they hit REM sleep, and you may know this, I'm not going to say that, it's not like I'm the only one that looks at this stuff, but the one thing that I found fascinating is when you go into REM, your brain engages the portion of your brain that's used to walk, move, pick up things. And there's another part of your brain that shuts off mobility physically.
Yeah, you're kind of paralyzed, basically.
You're correct. So you're still able to breathe. You're still able to swallow. You're still able to function. But anything that has to do with your limbs are technically shut off. But the part of your brain during REM that engages is the same one that engages when you do walk, you do move, and you have anything that has to do with mobility. So that in return made me question, well, why would that be the case? Why would your brain turn that on, but subtly turn it off to where the rest of your body does not? And then I started thinking, well, we move in our dreams. How is it if we ourselves are energy? Like, follow me on this crazy exploration we're about to take. What if we are an energy in our dimensional plane, but when we sleep, who's to say that we per se stay 100% in our plane of existence? Who's to say that our plane of existence that we go to, because again, we're not limited to time. How many times have people say, I had this dream and it's almost like I remembered back to when I was a kid and I had this experience with my mom or dad. When you go to that next dimension, time is not on a dimensional plane. That's now. We live on a dimensional plane of time now. That next dimension may not have time. So we could be free flowing within that dimensional plane without a time spectrum. But the fact that our brain turns on the capability to walk, to move, when there's no reason to, there has to be a reason. Our body just doesn't do things just to do it.
Yeah.
So what if we're going on a different dimensional plane and that's how we're able to move? Now, that would make me question, and why science does. I think it's because science doesn't necessarily care about that. There's bigger fish to fry in their world. But the first question I would ask is, if that's the case and we're doing that and we've proven it by doing these sleep studies and stuff like that, are we using that somewhere else on a different dimensional plane?
That's interesting.
And if we are going to a different dimensional plane, if these other entities are on that dimensional plane, who's to say we all cannot come into that same dimensional plane? So to us, we're having a dream. We're really not. We're just consciously remembering something where we was technically somewhere else.
I could see it.
I mean, it sounds crazy. Like, even when I say it out loud, it sounds crazy, but there has to be a reason our brain does it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel like this for us is just we're just built up of atoms, right? The same things that our body's made up of is the same thing our glasses are made up of, our mice are made up of, our cars, our lives, our walls. They're all atoms. It's just how those atoms are structured. When we're not held to the obligation of being inside this body anymore, there's not a worry about, do I have to open a door? You just pass through it. Which brings me back to static. Another thing that I watched that has absolutely nothing to do with any of what we're talking about, but they correlate. Mm-hmm. I was watching this guy and he was coming up with this. It's almost like he came up with it from a standpoint of super chilling things. And the way he did it was he used an algae that was then introduced to a liquid that turned into a gel. He uses salt and ice to super cool whatever the thing is. Now, what I found fascinating that he said was the moment that you introduce algae, ice, and salt, it's super cool and it creates an energy field of its own. Now, we're talking on microscopic volts. Like, it's not, you couldn't power anything with it. But here's the question. If it's able to create that, why?
Yeah.
And our bodies are just energy. That's all it is. And a lot of people don't think about it on a grand scheme. When you touch your phone, You're touching it because your energy, your voltage is connecting with something that can then fill that energy source. So it's not, you're not pressing down and it's feeling it. That's why when you use whatever you're using, right? Let's use, for example, some styluses will work on some phones and some don't. It's a voltage. There's a certain amount of volts. When you pass away, you don't have volts anymore. Well, where does that volt go? Where does those small energy cells go? They're not in your body anymore. Which takes me back to cases of near-death experiences. A lot of times people that have near-death experiences will oftentimes talk about seeing or being able to talk to, if you talked, man, I can't divulge too much. I've got another podcast that will eventually come up, and I'm going to be talking to someone who worked in nursing homes for a long time, was a skeptic until she started working in nursing homes. She's been doing it for, I think, 15 years, something like that. When people are at the end of their life and they go into hospice, and we're typically talking about elderly people, the number one thing they talk about is angelic beings or people that they hadn't seen who had passed on that they're now starting to interact with, typically within the last couple of days of their lives. I then begin to question, could it possibly be that these entities is not that they're coming into our world, but that we're slowly transitioning into their dimensional plane? So maybe they're not coming to us. We're just, in their case, they're slowly passing on to the next dimensional plane. So maybe they're, like some people say, 1 foot in the grave, 1 foot out of the grave. I would assume it's not just you're alive today and you're dead tomorrow. There's got to be some sort of transition.
That's an interesting thought.
I watch a bunch of nerd things. I can't help myself. I get curious about these things and I go, why is that the case? And that's the beauty of having two podcasts. I have this one that only deals in paranormal hauntings, all that stuff. And then I've got the other one that we talk about UFOs. We talk about cryptids, but a lot of people goes, that's crazy talk. The correlation between everything is crazy. When you talk about the whole thought process I had on now spirits and ghosts, they didn't come from ghosts and spirits. They came from talking about UFOs and extra dimensional beings and how when you watch them on video, it's almost like they stutter across the sky. It's like they disappear. And the theory is they're going between one dimension to the next, almost in like a sound wave, right? A sound wave is like a pattern.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. That's why our team refers to us as paranormal researchers.
Yes.
Paranormal encompasses more than just ghosts.
Yes.
And yes, there's been cases where we've delved into other aspects of the paranormal umbrella, and we're like, this brings it back to this. This brings it back to that. And
right.
It's like, so no, I know exactly what you're talking about.
But it's crazy because when you look at it all, you're like, these all interconnect somehow.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense. It's like a great example. When you look at the Hinsdale house, they also have UFO cases at that Hinsdale house. And you go, why would that be? Of all the places, why would these two? And they even have, some people will argue that it's different, but technically cases of cryptid like creatures also, weird sounds, weird acknowledgments of beings that aren't typically human. Some people will call them elemental, and it goes, okay, well, you know, what is that? What would cause that? And then it makes me wonder if that property has some type of I like using the terminology of portal, because portal for me is just an easy way for me to connect everything together, right? But I have of the personal belief that Hinsdale has a portal, and I believe that Wildwood has a portal also. But I believe Wildwood's portal's significantly different than Hinsdale's portal. And I believe Hinsdale is it's all about me approach, and by that, whatever that encompasses at that house, versus with Wildwood, I feel like Wildwood is kind of like, hey, it's free to anyone that wants to come through can come through. And that's just the vibe that I get from the stories that I hear.
I mean, it is kind of a rotating door there.
Yeah. That seems to be what I hear. Now, one thing that we didn't really cover since we've been talking is, obviously, you got into the research at 16 years of age. Now, Jeremy did research also, your brother. what did he really kind of focus in on when he was doing his research?
Well, it's kind of funny. We were very close to our research was very similar. There were points where we would be months, or like we may not have a long conversation for a month or two, and then we hop in the car to go to Wildwood Sanitarium, and we start talking about something. We realize we've been doing the same research the entire time, but we're coming at it from a different angle and coming at it and end up almost with the same answer. We did a study on apparitions that became a huge thing. EVPs. He was focused on the pseudo consciousness, which was more of consciousness that can't learn, I guess is the best way I could describe it. He worked on telepathy, if that's a thing. Spirits being able to also plant thoughts. There were experiments where we were trying to just, think about what we want to say or an image or something like that, and see if we get an EVP about it. So he did a lot of diverse research, and a lot of it was very similar to what I was doing, but it was just like we came at it maybe from a different angle. But our last major project that we worked on together was specifically apparition related.
You and Jeremy was definitely into the same realms as far as what you were doing. Like you said, you came about it from different angles.
Mm-hmm.
For you, that has to be both comforting because you have someone that you're very close to that, let's be honest, I'm sure you knew all his dark secrets. He knew all your dark secrets, but you have this camaraderie, this one thing that you both love,
mm-hmm.
that you both look at each other and go, this is kind of our, as I put it, bang zone. This is our bang zone. This is kind of what we're thriving to be. Now, for those that watch and listen, I kind of want to go into, Jeremy unfortunately had passed away. He had that event, and I'm sure that took a very significant toll on you because now you've lost a brother, you've lost somebody that you kind of share this one thing with for all these years. Mm-hmm. That had to have taken a significant toll on you. Just watching your video, and for anyone that doesn't know, you're definitely going to want to check out John's channel, and I'm going to link it all in the description down below. The story is absolutely fascinating. I'm glad here we can kind of put some type of semblance in everything together. He's going to be doing the same exact thing on his channel, but to a much deeper degree. So whereas mine kind of stops in this podcast here, his is going to be a continuation that you're all going to want to check out. But I do want to kind of cross into that because I think that's a big part of your story now, kind of going forward.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy, my brother Jeremy, I mean, he ended his own life at the age of 30. It was July 7th, 2021. I'll never forget that day. You can't. Getting that phone call while you're at work. And I remember when I got that phone call, it was like, how you have like before death, there's a report of your life flashes in front of your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I had that experience in a different way. I had our lives together flash in front of my eyes. I had our dreams, the dreams I had of everything that we wanted to do together, flash in front of my eyes. And I watched that like almost symbolically, almost like burn up. But now I'm also a paranormal researcher, and I'm like, he is, if consciousness truly exists, he's on that side now. He knows. And if consciousness doesn't exist, well, then he no longer exists. Or consciousness outside the body is what I mean. So it did changed things. For a while, because part of what he experienced had to do with our haunting, and everything in his life led up to that moment where he made that final decision. And I'll never forget when I saw his no. And a lot of people, when they hear this part, they're like, oh, it's such a good thing, until you look at it from my perspective. The last thing he wrote in his note was to me. And he said, John, we'll be in touch, I promise. Now, for a lot of people, that's like, see, he made a promise, he's thinking about you, he's going to be in touch, which he has been, of course. But I look at it as like, there's a deeper element to that. John, I'm aware that, we did this research together, and it's without a doubt that spirits exist, that consciousness exists outside the body. So I know that when I do what I'm about to do, we will see each other again. That's how I interpreted it. And Jeremy and I, when we could say, when we said things, there are points where when we say something or write something, it's not always surface. There is a deeper element. So was that a deeper thing that he was saying? Is that, don't worry, John, you and I both know I'm not gone. I'm just leaving this part of this life.
Now, was there any indication that this could possibly happen? Like, had there been conversations or possibly things that you acknowledge where you're like, this could possibly happen? Or was this completely just left field, caught you off guard?
A month and a half before he did it, I did ask him if he was planning to do anything. Nobody else was tipped off about it. Everybody else that had interactions with him didn't know that he was doing this. He told me, of course, a month and a half before, he was like, no, I'm not planning to do anything. And I looked at him and I'm like, because I have severe depression myself. Mm-hmm. I know the cues. I've tried to do it myself at age 16. I know the cues. When I saw them, there was a side of me that's like, there's my one side that's like, no, of course this isn't going to happen. And then there's a side of me there was another side of me that was like, I don't believe you, Jeremy. I think you're going to do something. Come to find out, he actually had an appointment with I'm not sure if it was a psychiatrist or what have you, but found out that after his passing, that that the therapist or psychiatrist or whatever deemed him as a warm case. They didn't deem at the same time I questioned him. For them, they said, oh, he's fine. On my end, I'm like, he's not fine. Now, I didn't know that this had happened already. So for me, there was a side of me that thought that this was possible. And so when I got the call, yes, there was still that shock value. I just lost my last sibling, because I had a half sister. Half sister died years upon years ago. And now I've gone from having a younger brother who I traveled with to all these places and did all this research together, to being an only child.
Yeah. I could see where that would, from a mental standpoint, would be very difficult. Very difficult.
No, it's destroyed relationships. Like there were many aspects of me that changed for the worse during this.
Sure.
So I did lose a lot of people as a result of it. And I mean, it sucks. I figured people would be more understanding with a dynamic situation like this, that it's going to take a long time to heal. But I'm finding out who truly actually loves and cares for me and who doesn't. And come to find out that, that circle is extremely small. Mm-hmm. But I know how it feels now. So like, it's always goes back to, I know how this feels, and now I'm going to make sure that no one else ever experiences this,
Sure.
Because I'm used to that abandonment. I've had that my entire life. this was a huge abandonment. Like, I actually reacted to this as abandonment. Like, Jeremy, how could you do this? How could you leave me? Like, you're my closest friend. 30 years we spent our lives together, and you chose to not stick around. Like, you left me.
I think what happens in cases like that, it's easy for us to look at it from an analytical standpoint of our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
You get in such a dark place. I've never dealt with depression like that, but I've noticed a lot of people that has, and I've been around a lot of people that has, and what's almost exactly the same across all of the people is they all feel like that moment, they're at their darkest moment, and there's no getting out of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the moment, luckily I've been able, so I'm not going to get emotional on this. We're going to keep this close to chest. I've had a series of friends that have been close to that line, and I'm a very analytical person, so I pick up on some things occasionally, kind of like you did with your brother.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, hey, what's going on? I'm something's off. Like, what's going on? And just like your brother, like, nah, everything's fine, man. Everything's good. And I've been lucky enough that one did call me the night of. They had already had everything planned out. And it took a lot of talking to kind of pull them back on the path. And they're still dealing with it to this day. It never goes away, I don't think. With some medications and some help and therapy, I think that eventually people can find their way, but I don't necessarily know that there's enough out there when it comes to mental health, which any of you that's watching this or listening to this, no matter where you are, if you feel like you're in that dark spot, talk to somebody, have a conversation, because there is a lot of good things, but a lot of times we don't see it until years later. Things that when we think we're in the darkest moments of our lives, things can sometimes get better even though they seem like they cannot. So if any of you are feeling like that, please do yourself a favor. Please reach out to somebody. If they're not taking you seriously, then go to the next person. Eventually someone will listen. Didn't want to go too dark with that, but I've seen it firsthand, and much like with your brother, I think that's probably the case. When you're so far down deep into that hole, man, it's hard to look up and think there's light at the end of that. That's going to be good. Now for you, obviously that puts you in a much darker spot. I'm assuming you probably stepped away from some stuff for a while too, just to kind of reevaluate your entire path as far as what you're going to, like, I would think that'd be difficult. Like if you had someone that you're doing this with, and whatever, I don't know that I could necessarily go back into it with the mindset of, without having that be a constant memory anyway. And you're still technically dealing with this. I mean, this is a very short time frame.
I did, there was about a week or so where I did say that I was going to hang everything up. I was going to hang up my team uniform and say, you know what, we're done. We're done with this, because I looked back on it as his bullying and stuff that happened to him all started when I opened my mouth about the paranormal. So that's where my blame came in, that it's like all of these years led up to this moment, and I felt like it started with me. So but then there's that side of me that I'm just like, I'm watching also my parents go through this. My parents they're burying their child.
Right.
It's something I should have never, ever, ever observed, ever.
Right.
They just retired. This is what their retirement is grieving over the loss of their son, who did it. He lived with my parents. He did it in their house.
Right.
So, but then I'm like, you know what? This work needs to continue. His legacy needs to go on. And so anybody who sees any of the videos, current videos that I do now, you're going to notice I wear a gray lab coat. That's my brother's lab coat. There's two aspects of the story of reasons why I wear the lab coat. The second one, you'll find out in the new reboot series that we're doing. But one of the big reasons I wear the lab coat is that it's a symbolism of wherever I go, he goes. We're in this together. It's the Griffin brothers. And he has communicated with me. I have him on EVP, Spirit Box, even caught an apparition. His apparition, boy, that was an emotional one. So I know he's helping. He's on that side, and I begged for him. Please, if you still are in existence, and I called out to God and everything, like I was. It had been the first time because that's actually that night. I ended up praying for the first time in a long time on my way home from the hotel where my parents had to stay while they couldn't be at the house. And I said, if there's heaven and hell, if there's punishment for the way that he went or anything like that, please, he suffered enough in life. I feel responsible for this. If he has to have any punishment whatsoever, can he please be with me and experience our emotions as we go through this? And he has to help us. And so long as I follow through on my thing, when I cross, we cross into the light together. That he can essentially have a redemption arc. Now, that's if, of course, any of that is legitimate, and I said, I'm willing to suffer more in life. If that means that I'm going to suffer more in life to help his spirit be redeemed, then so be it. I would gladly suffer more for my brother, knowing that he gets to go into paradise. But yes, going into the paranormal research aspect of it, the dynamic has changed. He's still around, and knowing that he's still around with the evidence that I've gotten of him, I've been able to consult with him on things. He's helped, and that ended up leading to capturing an apparition of him. He actually helped with that, and it's such a mind-blowing story. And I remember when we got his apparition, somebody put it in front of me and said, "John, take a look at this." And I looked at it and I saw him immediately. And my mother was there. This was at Wildwood Sanitarium. I handed her the phone that the picture was taken on. And I said, "We got Jeremy." And I remember running out of Wildwood Sanitarium out to the front sidewalk area, and I fell to my knees and started sobbing.
One thing, and I never typically go super religious, I think the assumption is most people believe that when you go that way, that there is no redemption, and that is unbiblical. That's completely unbiblical. We can't tell where someone's going to go based on how they went, because until the very last millisecond, like we talk about how life flashes in front of our eyes in a split second. There's nothing that said that somebody cannot recoup whatever that moment is in those last milliseconds of life. So I'm of the opinion, though, if those kind of things happen, or they can happen, our brain is still active for, in some occasions, minutes after we're deceased, the brain activity. So I will never believe that that is ever a end all be all, and this person's then, whether you believe or not, is condemned to damnation for the rest of eternity. To me, that's absurdity, because that would mean if you do believe in a God, that there's no such thing as a redeeming God at that point.
Yeah.
So, but yes, when you look at from a standpoint of seeing something like that, because, and I don't want to give too much of your story that you don't want to give away. I've seen obviously a decent amount from what you've sent me, but when we talk about the story of how this even came to be, you had technically called out to Jeremy to have him be the first person that you make communication with. And it's a fascinating video. You're going to want to stick around to the end, because I'm going to snippet part of this. You're going to have to watch the rest of it on John's channel over there, but I'm going to give you a little teaser, a little taste for sure. But you technically asked for Jeremy's help, and he came through with flying colors. And
he does a lot. And yeah, he's really helped send me down different paths. Funny how that works. I mean, that's a little hint to your audience right there.
Right.
And when we're heading, he's taken me down all these different roads, and I'm just kind of like, I wouldn't have even considered it. But then since he did it, like, it's different when it's just some random spirit that I have like no connection with. It's like, oh, well, is it really that? But then when Jeremy comes through and it's like, that's my brother.
Right.
Okay. Like the perfect, for instance, and I won't go into it, fully, because yes, it's in that pilot episode, was the spirit box. I can't tell you how much, for the longest time, I could not stand spirit boxes.
Yeah.
Even with my neutral mindset and all that, I have to be able to measure things, and I have, like for spirit box, I'm like, how can I create a measurement system to study this? It doesn't make sense to me. So to me, it's like, this seems like all a bunch of random, mumbo jumbo. When Jeremy comes through, not once, but multiple times, and even interacts with me directly, I'm like, and he knew I did not like spirit boxes. And then he comes over on that. And I'm like, you son of a gun. Like, you're making me look at this now.
Yeah.
And now I had to. So, and ended up building my own spirit box with the help of, the name's Rick Perry. Awesome spirit box builder. I was just like, it was his that Jeremy was coming over that convinced me to look into it. And now I've been working on measurement systems and all that to try to understand this, like, how is this all working? Because I'm taking my digital recorder. I love my EVPs. Nothing could beat that.
Right.
But there's such a huge story behind all of that. And then since we were focused on the apparitions, Jeremy caught an amazing apparition, his final apparition before his passing, at Wilson Castle. It was a huge moment, which led into a project that I named called Project Apparition Hall. And with Jeremy was officially the first apparition to appear in Project Apparition Hall. That was the picture I was talking about, where I ended up running out of Wildwood Sanitarium in tears. And like I said, he's just been helping nonstop. To give people a general idea of our dynamic on the science level, Jeremy did a lot with mathematics and statistics, and I was also a statistics person and numerology. So anything that was outside of what we were doing, we both would consult with each other. Now, you brought us both together. We were the numbers people.
Yeah.
So I don't have that mathematics portion of me. That was him. So I'm missing that aspect. And that's a huge part of science, is mathematics. So it's not a stretch when I say I've lost like half of myself when he died.
For sure. But here's the thing, there's a part of me that believes, because he was also in the same field, and he was in the same field with you, he understands what both of you are able of measuring. And on top of that, he knows what it is that John looks for. Now, that being said, he's going to try to open your eyes to potentially something that you're not looking at. So, prime example being the spirit box. For those of you listening at home, also, I don't want you all to be confused. I think that the thought process on a lot of spirit boxes is just the module that sits there and it goes, which it does. Some people refers to what you're talking about as almost like a phantom box is another terminology I've heard used. It's funny because actually upstairs, I think I just saw my Amazon delivery. I actually received some of the parts I need to do the same thing. I watched this wonderful young lady that showed how to build one, and I'm like, I want to do that. So, yeah, I'm kind of in that same step and point where I'm trying to build one also, because I really wanted to make sure I had that fine-tuned and tuned in before I went to the Wildwood, because I think that's where that's going to probably come into the existence heavy. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'll get as much of that at Hinsdale. I could be wrong. I don't feel like that's the place for that. Like, it can happen. I just don't feel like that's going to be the bulk of that. Could be wrong. Listen, heck if I know. But I think that he's leading you possibly in directions of, hey, you don't look at this, look at this. Stop being, I'm going to use this probably in terminology of my relatives and how we talk to each other. Stop being ignorant. Look at this, idiot. Look, you can get at me here. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of times I think we do go into a silo mindset where we're like, this is what works. Nothing else is going to work. This is all pseudoscience. And the problem is, we don't know. I hear it all the time. People go, man, cat balls are junk. Okay, well, maybe they are. I can't speak on it, right? I think you can have a lot of false positives, but in the same regard, I'm going to use another example in addition to that one. I have a lot of people that will say mag lights are junk. They're just the heating element, cooling element, turn on, turn off. It's all periodic. And I believe that they are absolutely correct. Scientifically, you can look at it, you can look, heating element lights up, then turns off. It cools back down, then it heats back up, then there's timing. But my question becomes, if it flips on and off in the intervals that you can't measure, does that make it not paranormal? So I think that everyone wants to look and disprove things, but I think that does them an injustice. It's not finding things that do or do not work as we perceive them. It's the weird instances in between those measurements that I believe is what makes it paranormal.
Well, that's where you have your what we refer to as baseline.
Yes.
Establishing your baseline, so how things are supposed to work. And heck, I've even established baselines for paranormal activity. Like, I have a baseline for those baselines, and then you get anything that's outside of that. So, and people need to remember, when it comes down to science, if you want to do true science in the paranormal field, you have to be neutral. Science is neutral. Science doesn't play believer, skeptic, disbeliever, or anything of that sort. It's basically, here are the facts, whether you like it or not. So research is a mindset. And if you can't just jump into it, I try to tell anybody who's starting to jump into this stuff, don't just jump into it until your mind is ready. If you can't look in the mirror and say something controversial that is like, like for me, I go with my beliefs that, okay, ghosts exist. That's my belief. But as a researcher, that belief is nothing now. Yeah. I have to be able to look in that mirror and go, John, I'm going to do research that could prove or disprove the existence of life after death. Mm-hmm. Key part, disprove. Okay? That goes against my belief. If I can't sit there and accept not get upset about the fact that I'm going to say that or hesitate on it or anything like that, that's going to determine whether I'm going to go into it or not. And there's been research projects that I felt an emotional response to it, and I had to ask myself that if I was ready to do this project. Until I can get myself into as close to a neutral mindset, because we're never going to be 100% neutral. No,
it's impossible.
If I can get as close as I can to that neutral aspect, that neutral mindset, where I'm going to have less of an emotional response, and if the stuff goes against what I believe, that I can get past it quicker, I'm ready to go with it. But until I can have that feeling, until I can have that, avoid that emotional response that's going to impede on the research itself and give me false data, I won't go into it. So even with that spirit box thing, yeah, he came over. There was that one where he came over and said his voice, Jeremy Griffin, came over the spirit box loud and clear. I was like, oh my goodness, that's super cool. Did I get a spirit box then? Nope. Was I willing to go into the study of spirit boxes? Nope. Because my belief at that point was I was actually annoyed with it. I was like, why is he coming over so close on a spirit box? I think these things personally, in my belief, not a researcher, but my belief, they're junk.
Yeah.
But here he is coming over loud and clear to the point even my parents who don't do paranormal, they heard him first and last name like, oh my goodness, that's Jeremy. It's like, spirit boxes thing I don't like.
Yeah.
It wasn't until several other instances where I finally was like, okay, mirror time. John, are you ready for this? I'm ready. Okay, let's go build this thing.
Right. And that's the key. I think that we all have to have somewhat of a open mind. Mm-hmm. Even if we think it's crazy, we have to have a little bit of an open mind. Some of the greatest, I guess you could say, concept people in what we do, it all came from a mindset of, I'm going to try X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And that's truly, I believe, what will open up Pandora's box, so to speak, in the realm of what we do.
1000%.
Now, when we talk about what you've done, obviously, I know we've talked about your past a little bit. What do you have coming up in the future? I want you to be able to talk to the people about what you have coming up.
So we do have we're really trying to document the story. As you may have mentioned earlier, like really delve into the story. So we have a reboot series called The Path to Communication. Hence the whole thing about the path. It's going to be an emotional story. It really focuses on building. We're going to have character arcs where we're building ourselves up. You're going to see us succeed. You're going to see moments where it doesn't go well, but you're also going to see the experiments. We're going to delve into the experiments as well, like why, the hypothesis, how it's being built. So you're actually going to see how some of the processes actually is working. And our big project that we've been focusing on right now, like I mentioned earlier, was the project Apparition Hall. That has taken, especially within the past couple months, has taken front and center. The results that we've been getting have been nothing short of incredible. And the reason we're focusing on the apparitions right now, because EVPs, we made great strides with them. We have great data on it. We identified trends. But the one thing is that I want to know who I'm talking to. And again, it goes back to that composition. So the Project Apparition Hall is now front and center because it's pretty much the hardest thing that any researcher can document. And I want to alleviate that difficulty. Why is it so hard to get pictures and videos of apparitions? So that's our huge project right now, and we have a documentary that we're filming on it now. Now that we know that what we are doing is having an impact. There's a documentary called Project Apparition Hall that we're releasing in 2025, and it's going to document the history of. It's going to go back to with my brother, where it started, and believe it or not, one of the main starting points for Project Apparition Hall was the Hinsdale house.
Interesting. Isn't it funny how that kind of, I don't know, for me, it's like I've had a few opportunities to do a few other, now I've done some investigations before in the past, but like from a going to film standpoint, I wanted my first one ever to be the Hinsdale house followed by the Wildwood.
It's a good combination.
It's crazy.
It really is. You're gonna it's gonna be a great weekend for you.
Now, another one that I want to do eventually, and I would love for the owner to actually reach back out to me because I've reached out before. I'd love to do the Bel Air house here in Ohio. I would love to.
I have not been there yet, and I was just in Ohio. I'm from New York,
Yep.
but I was just in Ohio this past weekend.
There's so many fascinating places here too. But I think the Bel Air is like, it's up there on my list of places that I want to go to. I don't know. That one, I'm going to wait. I want Hinsdale to be first, and I want Wildwood to be second. So from then on, listen, we can do the Bel Air at some point, but it's definitely on my list. I want to go there for sure.
I've got like a list from Ohio. Ohio is just like it's got such amazing haunted places, and I look at these, the rich history and these buildings and structure. I'm like, why do you have to be so far?
And that's what's crazy. Like for me, because I live like central Ohio without doxing myself, basically. But like to get to the Hinsdale is 5.5 hours. So it's not bad.
So it's funny for me because like my favorite places is Wildwood Sanitarium.
Yep.
I mean, my team's even a sponsor for it. Like we're there all the time. We've been there over 200 times since 2018, and it's it's our second home. I live in New York, where that is. It takes me without stops 4 hours and 45 minutes to get to the place. Now,
that's crazy.
Wilson Castle, which is in Vermont,
yep,
takes me an hour and a half.
Isn't that insane?
Like, come on. Why? Like, okay, then you've got the Hinsdale House, you got Sweet Home Estate, you've got all these other amazing places out in Western New York that take me anywhere from 3 to 5 hours to get to. Yep. Pennsylvania has some great places. Ohio has some great places. I'm like, I'm just going to go and get rich. I'm going to pick up all these properties, bring them there, and just drop them in my place.
Exactly. That's I forget.
Sorry, everybody.
I forget who it was I was talking to the other day. I said, first haunted location that comes up for sale. Good luck, someone trying to outdo me. I kind of want to buy my own spot, so I don't have to worry about it no more. Have my own spot. Listen, paranormal investigators, you gotta wait till I'm done.
I've looked at it, and please don't take any offense to this, Brooke or Lori. If they ended up ever giving up Wildwood Sanitarium, I guarantee you I would be on that in a heartbeat. That place, again, that's not only do I have like Brooke and Lori, their family, they're a second family to me. I love them to death. Our team loves them to death. They are amazing people. And Wildwood Sanitarium is like a second home also. So I have like that connection. Plus it's a place that my brother and I went to. We traveled there all the time. It was like we're living there.
Yeah.
So yeah, you better believe that if they ever gave up that property, I'm snatching that thing.
I bet. That's the thing. You get set up in some of those locations, you go, wow. Like for me, the first place that I had that wasn't a place that I lived in or someplace like that, the first place that I truly went to and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I see why this place is so haunted, was the Ohio State Reformatory, which is where Shawshank Redemption was recorded. And that place it'll make your skin crawl a little bit.
Oh, I've been there. I've been there once for filming, and that I want to get back there.
It's such a fascinating, and yet they don't do that anymore. Did you know that? They do the tours, but they don't allow investigators in anymore, like overnight.
That's broke my heart.
I know that hurt me too, because I'm like, I want to add that to my list. That was actually one of the first episodes on my podcast that blew up. I think I had like 30-some thousand views, 34,000 views, I think, on it. So people love it.
I'm gonna have to check that out, because I mean, last I knew, well, then again, I haven't checked in over a year, but
yeah, this was recent. Someone told me. I did go to their website to see if I could find, and I did not see on their website where they did anything other than Halloween or like a tour through the day. I did not see any overnight options.
And they used to have it. They used to have it posted there. So yeah, yes. That it might be real.
Which sucks. I hope they turn that around, because I think they're missing out on that. I'm curious if maybe someone got hurt, because it's a relatively dangerous spot if you're not paying attention. The stairways are not super forgiving. It's not in the best of shape. So I'm curious if that had something to do with it.
Oh man, that's sad. That is really sad.
So I'm going to ask a few questions here that's a little off the cuff, but I think it'd be fascinating, kind of fun for people, since we've kind of went through our stories a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to grab one piece of paranormal equipment to take to a spot that you deem as potentially possibly haunted, what's the one piece of equipment you would have to take every single time?
I'm just going to go with, at this point, the handmade spirit box.
Wow. Okay.
That we did. I know. Isn't that's opposite?
It's like coming around full circle for you there. Jeremy taught you well.
I hate this thing. I'm bringing this with me every time now.
Exactly. That's the one thing. Thought of a paranormal piece of equipment that you think is overhyped. This might be fun.
Oh, that's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
I honestly would go. I'm like between the K2 meter and the motion sensors. The motion sensors, it kind of when they go off and such, there's been so many logical explanations and so many questions that I end up having that I just really can't go with it. So I have actually stopped using them.
You know, for me, similar. And I thought for sure you'd say this because I feel like we're on the same wavelength with a lot of stuff. REM pod.
That was
so many false positives.
That almost came out of my mouth.
Yeah.
I've had some good outcomes with the REM pods. I don't own one myself.
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat right now where I chose, because when I purchase a piece of equipment, I need to have more than one reason, and I need to have some way to measure results. And the REM pod, I've had people bring them over. I've worked with people who use them, and I've seen some interesting results, but then there are points that it's just like they go off and go off and go off, and I'm like, I'm not really sure.
I think that's one of the instances like we talked about where you have to understand the measure of how it's occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at the instances in between. But for me, there's so many false positives that I'm like, how would you ever really know?
It's kind of unforgivable. So you almost have to do a research session upon a research session. You have to research the baseline of that, research the baseline of it at a haunted location, and then, so you're basically, and I've done that before. I've researched with equipment to research the equipment.
Yeah.
And I haven't felt that I'm ready to research the REM pod yet.
The one thing that I found fascinating, I just watched a video on this the other day. It's from somebody that mentioned that you can set one off super easy with the cell phone.
I've seen that.
So a lot of these YouTube channels that use it and they get all this amazing, and it goes off exactly when they tell it to. It's just someone off camera using a cell phone. Potentially. I'm not saying that's what the YouTube channels are doing. I'm saying it's possible. And don't ask me to tell you how to do it because I'm not going to do it. You YouTube channels that do that crooked stuff. Don't you come to old Bert for that, okay? We don't need any more fakery out in his things. Trust and believe. Yeah. The REM pod for me would probably be overhyped.
It almost kind of, it reminds me of the motion sensors.
Agreed.
To a degree, so.
Agreed. I would agree with that 100%. Well, I already know the answer to that. I feel like my viewers too. I'm not even going to ask you that question.
Now I'm curious.
I was going to say, if you had to go to a location the rest of your life, we've already determined that's Wildwood for you.
No, you're actually wrong. No, I'm just kidding. You're right.
Wow. I was like, wow, that's shocking. Where did Jeremy tell you to go to? Good night. You're keeping secrets from us over here. Locations that you've been to, obviously, is going to have different types of activity. Has there ever been a location that you went to and you're like, man, this place is going to be super crazy and it's just been dead?
Oh, that's a tough one.
And there's a reason I'm asking this question.
I'm going to go with Lizzie Borden's Bed and Breakfast.
That one would shock me a little bit. But then again, I think to myself, if it was going to happen there, like if there's going to be activity there and it's Lizzie Borden, why would Lizzie Borden stay there? But I still want to visit, by the way. I still want to go there.
It is a good place.
Now, I was a little bit devious in my question, a little facetious. And the reason for that is I was going to bring up this discussion. Sometimes in my thought process, and facility can be completely dead, right? To assume that it's always on, I think would be a deterrent to our thought process, because sometimes I think that much like any place in our living can be active one day and then dead another day, I think it happens in the paranormal realm more than we would suspect. So I'd be curious if there was ever to be a baseline. I would love it if these locations gave like a baseline of, hey, here's how much activity we truly do see, to understand how often the measurable, like let's say they've got a camera, in which I really would love to talk to Brooke again and be like, put some cameras up in that mug. Cause like with the Hinsdale house, they've got cameras. For only $100, you can get the footage of while you're there, which I think is kind of cool. But they have audio on them. And if you know there's no one in the house, it'd be real easy to measure the audio that's occurring on a daily basis. I'd be curious how often you hear footsteps or how often you hear something fall over. Or the interesting thing that I always find interesting is the phantom things. And by that, what I mean is one of the investigations, it was with Paul Kenyon the last time he was there, he and Link, they heard a marble that fell and rolled on the floor. There's no marbles in that house. So where does a marble come from?
Yeah.
Little things like that.
We had a case years ago where there was a piano key that played and there's no piano.
Isn't that
wasn't
crazy?
It was at a residential case, but I mean, yeah, that happened. There was a bucket in the same house in the basement. We heard a bucket fall. There's no bucket that fell.
That's fascinating to me. But again, it makes me wonder if in their dimension, if that stuff does exist. Like people go, why would someone want to stay in a crappy old beat down house? And I'm like, there's nothing to say in their dimension that it is old and beat up.
Well, if I could throw something out there, because that's a big topic of discussion right now with one of our most recent results of Project Apparition Hall. There was an apparition that we caught that was sitting on a phantom chair. Oh wow! That's and we caught part of that chair in the photo.
Oh, that is fascinating.
So this led me into, not to go into the religious aspect, but it's said that God is sitting on a throne.
Yep.
Well, who's to say? I mean, do they build things over there? Like supposedly in heaven, there's these big towering gold buildings, gold roads, and all that. Well, who's to say that there's not variations of things that are built and stuff on that side? So now I'm seeing an apparition sitting on a chair that doesn't exist.
Right.
Well, I mean, exist in our plane.
Right.
I've never. Let me tell you something. Since we've started doing this apparition thing, we have seen things. So many different apparition related stuff that I just. I can't grasp it, because just before Project Apparition Hall fully took shape, this was the thing that segued into it, was the photo that Jeremy caught. He was using long exposure photography. The goal of the long exposure photography that we were trying to do was to document, because with long exposure, for anybody who may not be familiar with it, when you have low light and you do long exposure, you can, like for instance, the lens stays open for a longer period of time and then absorbs as much light as possible, and then it closes. You can take a laser in the dark, do long exposure, start doing this with the laser, and when the lens closes, you can actually go to the picture and trace where the laser started to where it ended. That's how long exposure works. It's absorbing that stuff. We looked at it from an apparition standpoint. Can we get an apparition in motion or the manifestation process on camera using long exposure? Out of thousands of pictures, one came through where we actually documented what looks like the manifestation process of an entity. That led into Project Apparition Hall. And then Jeremy's photo was the first picture, and the first time we ever did Project Apparition Hall, he appears crystal clear. Now we have a picture of a person sitting in a phantom chair with part of the chair in the picture. We're getting all these amazing things through this experiment. And with these, it keeps on adding more things. Like now with the whole bucket thing, or the phantom objects and all that, we have a phantom object on photo.
Right.
Does this mean that if we do Project Apparition Hall and all these other places, is there a potential that we're going to get other phantom objects in the photo that don't exist? And the reason I asked that question, aside from the chair, there's another photo that I have not publicly put out yet that's going to appear in our documentary. It looks like a doll. There's a doll at Wildwood Sanitarium. It looks like a doll, and we're just kind of baffled by it. It's not there. It does not exist. At least the physical. Like, there is no doll at Wildwood Sanitarium that looks like this. And there was no doll at the time of the photo. It was an empty chair. The most recent thing that happened, which is going to be on one of the first interviews we're going to do in the new Path to Communication channel, and it's a sad story. I'm not going to go fully into it, but someone that attended the event, they ended up they had to put down their dog. Their dog appeared in a Project Apparition photo the day after. I think it was the day after. It was either 1 or 2 days before that she had to make that unfortunate decision. But then, and the crazy part is, because there were 3 people taking pictures at the time during this experiment, she snapped the photo of her dog.
Oh, wow.
Like, talk about... and, because she's not a paranormal researcher, I asked her, send all the photos to me, because of course I'm collecting data. I'm reviewing all of them. And I looked at the photo and I saw it immediately. I knew what her dog looked like, because she posted it. And when I saw the picture, I was like, is that her dog? I went back and I did a photo comparison. I'm like, there's no way. So I'm sitting there like, how do I approach her on this? She just lost her dog.
Yeah.
And here, so a dog, person sitting in a phantom chair, what I believe is a potential doll, the manifestation process. I mean,
that's insane.
And the story only gets deeper.
That's the beautiful thing. And this is why everyone needs to go check out his stuff. In the description down below, I'm going to lock everything down. Now, I also understand, I think the assumption is when we do these podcasts, well, he interviewed such and such and we'll never see him again. No. The goal is with this podcast is I'm building a group of people that we will talk to, and we will talk to them again in the future. So much like we had John on today, who knows, a year down the road, we might be developing another podcast and we might bring him back on and talk about what have we discovered going forward. So don't assume that this is a one and done ever. Listen, I might have to hog tie John and bring him back on and be like, listen, you're doing this podcast, kind of like they did in, what was that movie? Taken? Is that what it was? Or whatever it was. Well, I got a very special set of skills. That might happen here. I'm not unopposed to it. Okay. Jeremy, is there any part of your story that we've not covered that you feel like we should cover?
You just called me Jeremy.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. I have Jeremy on the head because I have another thought process I'm going, but
hey, you know what? We're both brothers, both close, so I'll take it as a compliment.
I put you side by side technically, and I didn't even know him at all.
I wish people had a chance to meet him. He was such a great person. He built computers for fun, by the way. That was He was a smart person. And I do apologize. What was the question again?
Is there any part of your story, speaking of Jeremy, that's where my mind was going, was Jeremy's a big part of your story. But is there any part of your story, John, that we've not covered that you feel like the people should know about?
I think ultimately it just leads down to, to be there for others. You never know what they're really going through. And, what Jeremy and I went through growing up all the way into our 20s, you learn not to abandon people. And, what I've learned is that it's easier to hate than it is to love.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And, it hurts knowing that, because there's the other side of that too, that people have to realize, that, if you receive so much hate for the person who wants to love themselves, it becomes easier to hate themselves than to love themselves. So, especially when it comes down to the paranormal can have a major impact in ways that people don't realize. A lot of it is, it's a haunting. Wow, that's scary or cool. But you find out what happens to them outside of that haunting. How does it affect their personal life, their friendships, their relationships, their family dynamic? I've watched families fall apart. I've watched marriages end. I've watched relationships end, friendships end. Conversation is important. And if there's anything, communication should be a key takeaway. We're all on this path. We're all on this journey together. And if you're on especially if you're doing the paranormal stuff, we're on the path to communication. Our goal is to get to that communication. Don't look at the path to communication as simply just communicating with the spirits. It's opening up dialogue between other people to come together.
That is dead on. I agree with that 100%. I think the simplified version of that is just take your time to love everyone. Life is way too short to focus on the hate. Case in point.
I wish I could be poetic like that and simplify everything.
I have a very simple mind, John. Very simple mind. Listen, my brain it flickers from time to time. You can see it. You can see the loading symbol above my head from time to time. I have to keep everything super simple.
For me, it's like, don't hate love. I'll write you a 100-page essay on it. So
that's good. So honestly, people probably need to read it if you're a bunch of haters out there. Well, I told you guys I was going to bring you a little teaser. Okay. I'm going to give you a morsel-sized portion of what John has going on. So until I see you on the next podcast, goodbye. Check this out.
My name is John Griffin II. I'm the CEO and founder of UNI Research. On July 7th, 2021, my brother Jeremy took his own life.
John, it's your mother. Please call me ASAP, please. I need to talk to you ASAP. It's bad. It's a little bad.
She said the dreaded words that no brother would ever want to hear. Jeremy killed himself. We found his suicide note, and I remember looking at it and seeing that the last line was directed at me. John, we'll be in touch. I promise. I knew from that point forward, I needed to reach out to my brother. I needed to know that he was okay. For our family, a large piece of us is missing. And I remember there's one photo from the funeral that I remember looking at. My eyes are always drawn to the image of my mother, and seeing the tears, seeing the frown, just the look on her face of just defeat.
I'm here with my son. I don't want him to feel alone, because he probably felt alone in so many ways. But his mom is here. I just need time to be by myself with him and just talk. And I'm gonna tell him how much I love him, because I can't do this. I just can't do this.
To see and know that they had to go through this, burying their child, the hardest thing any parent could ever do. It was eating me up inside. And I knew now more than ever that I had to do something. No more games. The paranormal needs to be solved now.
Tonight, and it's probably maybe within the past, I don't even know what time it was, maybe hour, half hour, something like that. We finally caught a picture of my brother Jeremy.
To be continued on John's channel path to communication. Channel in the description below.
Through the static, I hear you calling. In the silence, your voice is falling. Brother gone, but never really far. Echoes linger like a distant star. Spirit box, we talk through the night. Words of shadows in the pale moonlight, trying to bridge the void we know. Memories in whispers grow. Voices through the static, heartache so erratic. Brother, can you hear me now? Reaching through somehow. Every buzz feels like a clue. Moments lost but still so true. He left but left behind a trace. In the static I find your face. Brother, in the beyond I plead. Hear my call, it's a silent need. Stars may fade but our bond stays, guided by these haunted ways.